Welcome back to Dr. Dan's channel. Today we're talking about something Britain hasn't seriously confronted in decades. Not in speeches, not in white papers, and not in election campaigns. Revitalizing British manufacturing, how the UK can compete in a multipolar world. First, a word about power. Not the kind of power you might assume, not military power, not financial power, not rhetorical power, industrial power. Because here's the uncomfortable truth most headlines still won't tell you. Britain's struggle in the 21st century is not primarily about trade deals, migration, or even public debt. It is about production. And in a multipolar world, the countries that cannot build, cannot decide. This is not a culture war. It is not a nostalgia project. And it is not a return to smokestacks and coal. It is about whether Britain can remain a serious economic actor, or quietly drift into managed irrelevance. For decades, Britain believed it had solved the problem of power. We would specialize in finance, services, law, education, creative industries. Manufacturing, we were told, was old-fashioned, dirty, replaceable. Production could be outsourced. Innovation could be imported. Sovereignty could be abstracted. That assumption is now colliding with reality. Because the global system Britain helped design, open markets, long supply chains, cheap energy, predictable geopolitics, no longer exists. And what replaces it does not reward countries that only manage paper. It rewards countries that make things. In the quiet halls of academia and the polished corridors of power, we often discuss national strength in abstract terms. We talk of soft power, of cultural influence, of financial leverage, and the intricate dance of diplomacy. We build elegant models and theories about how nations compete and cooperate. But when the veneer of peacetime civility is stripped away, we are left with a much harder, more tangible reality. This isn't theory. This is the unforgiving arithmetic of survival. History is brutally, relentlessly consistent on this point. It does not care for our preferred narratives or our economic assumptions. It teaches one lesson again and again. In a crisis, the ability to make and move physical things is the ultimate arbiter of power. The nation that can forge steel, assemble engines, produce ammunition, and transport it all to where it is needed is the nation that endures. The nation that cannot becomes dependent on the will and capacity of others. It ceases to be sovereign in the truest sense of the word. Let's travel back to 1914. The great powers of Europe marched into what they believed would be a short, decisive war, a conflict of elan and strategy. They were catastrophically wrong. The war quickly devolved into a brutal, grinding stalemate, a war of attrition. And in a war of attrition, victory is not decided by the brilliance of generals, but by the output of factories. The powers that survived and ultimately prevailed were not necessarily the ones with the largest armies at the outset, but those that could manufacture weapons, transport, steel, and food at a colossal, previously unimaginable scale. The German industrial heartland in the Ruhr allowed it to sustain a two-front war for 4 years. Britain, the workshop of the world, could mobilize its vast manufacturing base and, crucially, its global maritime logistics network. In contrast, the Russian Empire, with its immense population but shallow industrial base, collapsed internally before the war was even over. Its inability to arm, feed, and supply its own soldiers on an industrial scale proved fatal. The lesson was written in iron and blood. Industrial depth is strategic depth. Now, jump forward to 1941. The world is once again engulfed in conflict, this time on an even greater global scale. And again, the same fundamental truth asserted itself. Victory did not hinge on diplomacy. That had already failed. It did not hinge on financial instruments. It hinged on shipyards, factories, and logistics. The Axis powers achieved stunning early victories, but they could not win a protracted global war against the latent industrial might of the United States. America's arsenal of democracy wasn't a metaphor. It was a physical reality. It was the Willow Run plant, rolling a B-24 Liberator bomber off the assembly line every hour. It was the Kaiser shipyards, building Liberty ships in a matter of weeks, then days. It was the sheer, overwhelming capacity to produce millions of tons of steel, millions of vehicles, and billions of rounds of ammunition. This industrial tsunami simply buried the Axis, whose own impressive war machines could not be replaced or scaled at a comparable rate. The war was won not at the negotiating table, but on the factory floor. Then came the Cold War, a conflict fought not with massed armies on the battlefield, but in the shadows, through proxies, and under the terrifying umbrella of nuclear deterrence. It was a different kind of struggle, a long twilight struggle, but the underlying logic remained the same. Industrial depth determined endurance. The competition between the United States and the Soviet Union was, at its core, an economic and industrial contest. Who could sustain the immense cost of a global military presence? Who could innovate faster in aerospace, electronics, and nuclear technology? The Soviet Union built a formidable military-industrial complex, but it was a brittle achievement. It came at the expense of its civilian economy, creating a system that was powerful but inefficient and ultimately unsustainable. The West, led by the United States, could support both guns and butter. Its diverse, dynamic, and technologically advanced industrial base provided the economic foundation for containment, for the space race, and for the eventual information revolution. When the Berlin Wall fell, it was not just a political failure for the Soviets. It was the final outcome of a decades-long industrial marathon that their system could no longer run. The lesson, for a third time in a century, was clear. A nation's long-term strategic endurance is a direct function of the depth, sophistication, and resilience of its industrial base. This is the immutable truth of modern history. And after 1945, Britain learned this lesson the hard way. We emerged victorious, and then slowly hollowed out the very industrial base that sustained us. What followed was not collapse. It was dependency. Here's the core reality Britain now faces. In a multipolar world, manufacturing is not an economic sector. It is a strategic capability. Factories are not just places of employment. They are anchors for skills, supply chains, innovation, and resilience. Countries that lose them don't just lose output, they lose options. And Britain has been losing options for a long time. To truly understand the challenge facing the United Kingdom, we need to talk about scale. This isn't an abstract concept. In the context of a nation's industrial power, scale is tangible. It is the physical capacity to produce, the depth of the supply chains that feed that production, and the sheer volume of output that translates into economic resilience and strategic leverage on the world stage. It's the difference between a workshop and a factory, between a blueprint and a global product launch. To grasp the current situation, we must move beyond anecdotes and look at the hard data. The numbers tell a stark and unambiguous story about a decades-long structural shift in the British economy. Let's begin with the headline figure, the one that encapsulates the scale of this transformation more than any other. In the post-war decades, Britain was unequivocally a manufacturing powerhouse. In 1970, for instance, the manufacturing sector was the engine of the economy, accounting for over 30% of the United Kingdom's gross domestic product. Nearly 1 in every 3 pounds of economic value generated in the country came from making things. This industrial base supported millions of jobs, fostered strong communities, and gave the UK a powerful voice in global trade. Today, that figure is closer to 9%. Let that sink in. The sector's share of the economy has fallen by more than 2/3. This wasn't a single event, but a long grinding process of deindustrialization, accelerating in the 1980s and continuing through successive economic cycles. But the story doesn't end there. One might assume that even with a smaller share, the absolute output would have grown due to technology and efficiency. The data tells a different, more concerning story. If we set the total volume of UK manufacturing output in 2008 as a baseline of 100, the sector has never recovered to that level. For over a decade and a half, despite a growing population and advancements in technology, Britain is physically producing less than it did before the financial crisis. This indicates a fundamental loss of productive capacity, a hollowing out that has profound implications for national security, supply chain resilience, and long-term prosperity. The industrial muscle has atrophied. Now it is crucial to state that this decline is not due to a lack of ingenuity. The opposite is true. Britain still designs world-class products. From the intricate fan blades in a Rolls-Royce jet engine to the life-saving formulations developed by its pharmaceutical giants, British design and engineering remain at the global apex. It still produces brilliant engineers, with its universities acting as magnets for the world's brightest minds in science, technology, and mathematics. And it absolutely still leads in early-stage research and development. The nation's ecosystem of universities and research institutions is a formidable engine of discovery, consistently pushing the boundaries of knowledge. But here lies the core of the paradox, the critical disconnect that we must address. Too often, British innovation leaves the country before it becomes production. The journey from a brilliant idea to a globally traded product has a missing chapter that should be written in the UK. Prototypes are developed here, in our world-class labs and workshops. The initial, high-risk, intellectual heavy lifting is done on these shores. But when the time comes to scale up, to move from a handful of units to mass manufacturing, the investment, the machinery, and the jobs move elsewhere. Manufacturing happens elsewhere. And this is the most important lesson. Value capture follows the factories, not the patents. While intellectual property has value, the lion's share of long-term economic benefit, the stable jobs, the development of ancillary industries, the expertise in process engineering, the tax revenues, and the strategic control over supply, is captured where the product is physically made. We have become exceptionally good at planting seeds, but we are letting others harvest the fruit. This model, where we originate ideas but outsource production, is a blueprint for managed decline. It surrenders the most valuable parts of the economic chain, leaving the nation exposed and economically unbalanced. To rebuild our industrial power, we must first reconnect the broken link between innovation and production, ensuring that British ideas are built by British hands, at scale. That is not an accident. It is the result of decades of policy that treated production as a cost, not a capability. There's a comforting myth in Westminster, a narrative whispered in boardrooms and echoed in the halls of our most prestigious universities. It's the idea that Britain can compensate for its shrinking industrial base by being smart instead of big. This is the central pillar of the post-industrial dream, a nation of thinkers, financiers, lawyers, and creatives, unburdened by the grimy, capital-intensive business of actually making things. The theory goes that in a globalized world, we can simply design the products, write the code, structure the deals, and let other, bigger countries handle the manufacturing. We would be the architects, they the builders. That specialization alone is enough. We've been told that focusing on our comparative advantage in high-value services is the most efficient path to prosperity. Why build cars when we can finance the companies that do? Why forge steel when we can provide the legal contracts for its sale? Why assemble electronics when we can design the software that runs on them? This logic is seductive because it plays to our strengths in education, law, and finance. It suggests a clean, sophisticated, and highly profitable future, one where intellectual capital reigns supreme over physical capital. It's a vision of a frictionless economy, where value is created with a keystroke, not a rivet gun. But specialization without industrial depth is fragile. It's a beautiful, intricate machine with no spare parts and no one who knows how to make them. For decades, this fragility was masked by a hyper-efficient, just-in-time global logistics network. The world was our factory floor, and goods flowed seamlessly across borders. But what happens when that system breaks? We found out. Because when supply chains fracture, as they did during the COVID pandemic, during the energy shock that followed the invasion of Ukraine, and now amid a broader geopolitical fragmentation, the rules of the game change completely. Suddenly, the ability to produce physical goods isn't a legacy concern. It's a primary instrument of national security and strategic leverage. During the pandemic, we saw a desperate global scramble for something as basic as personal protective equipment. Our world-class financial markets couldn't conjure gowns and masks out of thin air. Our brilliant legal minds couldn't draft a contract that would compel a foreign factory, prioritizing its own domestic needs, to ship us ventilators. The energy crisis was another brutal lesson. Countries with domestic energy production, or the industrial capacity to rapidly build out alternatives like nuclear or renewables, had options. They had leverage. Those without were exposed to the whims of volatile international markets and the geopolitical maneuvers of energy-rich states. In these moments of crisis, countries without production capacity don't negotiate. They queue, they wait, they pay whatever price is demanded, not just in money, but in autonomy. The smart economy discovers it is powerless when the physical world stops cooperating. Your service-based leverage evaporates when the goods and energy that underpin your entire society are controlled by others. You become a price taker, not a price maker, a supplicant, not a partner. Now, a new version of the smart myth is emerging, this time dressed in the language of the fourth industrial revolution. The argument is that automation, artificial intelligence, and 3D printing will make domestic manufacturing so efficient that we can simply leapfrog the need for industrial scale. We can have micro-factories and lights-out manufacturing that will solve our production deficit without the need for large workforces or sprawling industrial ecosystems. This is a dangerous delusion. Technology is a powerful amplifier, but it does not replace the fundamental laws of industrial physics. AI can optimize a supply chain, but it cannot create one from nothing. A robot can assemble a product with incredible precision, but it needs a steady stream of high-quality components to work with. A 3D printer can create a prototype, but it cannot, at scale, replace the complex, multi-stage processes of mass production, for everything from pharmaceuticals to turbine blades. Look at the world's most advanced manufacturing nations: Germany, South Korea, Taiwan. They are not abandoning their industrial ecosystems. They are embedding AI and automation within them. They are using technology to make their already deep industrial bases even more productive and resilient. They understand that technology and industrial depth are not substitutes. They are complements. The most advanced AI is useless for building a fighter jet if you don't have the aerospace-grade metallurgy, the precision engineering workshops, and the skilled technicians to execute the design. The smart approach only works when it is built upon a big foundation of physical capacity, skilled labor, and dense supplier networks. Without that foundation, we are simply building a castle in the cloud, beautiful to look at, but liable to vanish in the first storm. The uncomfortable truth is that there is no shortcut. Sovereignty in the 21st century is physical. It is forged in factories, not just debated in parliaments. This is why tariffs won't save Britain. Tariffs feel decisive. They look tough. They photograph well. But tariffs do not rebuild skills. They do not recreate supplier ecosystems. They do not train machinists, toolmakers, or process engineers. And they certainly do not compress time. Britain's manufacturing output today remains below its pre-2008 peak. That single fact should end the argument. If quick policy fixes worked, the data would already show it. They don't, because industrial strength is systemic, not additive. Now let's talk about the real constraint Britain faces. It is not capital. It is not talent. It is not ideas. It is coordination. Successful industrial economies are built around dense ecosystems, geographically concentrated clusters where finance, labor, suppliers, universities, logistics, and government reinforce one another over decades. Britain has done the opposite. Investment is fragmented. Policy is short-term. Funding follows electoral cycles. Infrastructure decisions are endlessly delayed. And the financial system, brilliant at moving money, is structurally hostile to long-term physical capital. That combination destroys scale. And without scale, productivity stalls. Look at Germany before its recent energy shock. Look at South Korea. Look at Taiwan. Their strength did not come from being cleverer. It came from staying committed. Britain, by contrast, repeatedly exited industries just as they became strategically important. Semiconductors, energy equipment, advanced materials, heavy engineering. Each time we told ourselves it didn't matter. Each time we were wrong. There is also a dangerous fantasy circulating in policy circles that automation and AI will allow Britain to bypass the hard work of rebuilding industrial capacity. This is backwards. Automation amplifies existing ecosystems. AI accelerates what already exists. They do not substitute for missing supply chains. Advanced manufacturing still requires skilled operators, material science, tooling expertise, maintenance capability, and dense supplier networks. Technology raises the bar. It does not lower it. Now let's address Britain's place in a multipolar world. The UK is not trying to outbuild China. That is not realistic, and pretending otherwise weakens strategy. Britain's path lies in selective industrial depth, high-value manufacturing, energy systems, defense supply chains, life sciences, precision engineering, critical infrastructure. But depth requires commitment. It requires long-time horizons, stable policy, serious infrastructure spending, and a financial system willing to reward patience. That is not a technical problem. It is a political one. Allies matter, but only if Britain brings something real to the table. You cannot outsource resilience and call it sovereignty. Networked strength works only when each node contributes production, not just regulation. In the emerging global system, countries that manufacture are rule makers. Countries that don't are rule takers. So here is the uncomfortable conclusion Britain keeps postponing. Economic sovereignty is no longer abstract. It is physical. Supply chains are strategy. Factories are leverage. Production capacity is deterrence. Britain's future influence will not be decided at summits or trade forums. It will be decided by whether this country once again treats manufacturing as a national capability, not a legacy industry. Industrial decline is reversible, but only if it is treated as a generational project, not a policy experiment. Other countries have already made that choice. The question is whether Britain finally will. If you value serious economic analysis without slogans, make sure you're subscribed to Dr. Dan's channel. Like the video if you want more long-form breakdowns like this. And leave a comment. What industry do you think Britain must rebuild first? Energy, manufacturing, or infrastructure? I'll see you in the next one.